Game Theory Class 2 Video 2. In this video we're going to talk about best response functions. Best response functions are the first step in what we're aiming to do over the next few classes, which is analyzing games. So now we know what a game is and we know what a payoff matrix is, so we know how to write it down condensedly. And now we want to start analyzing them. We want to start thinking about what the best thing to do is and what are some good strategies, what are the best outcomes and stuff like this. And the first place to start is best response functions. So let's start with the definition. A best response function is a function whose input is one of your opponent's strategies and whose output is the best strategy that you can play given that your opponent plays the inputted strategy. So the best response function, it's like you ask it, if my opponent plays this, what's the best thing that I can do? And it tells you what the best thing you can do is in response to your opponent. Okay, and there's some notation for this. So we say if X is a strategy for player 2, so it's just X is just the variable I'm using to denote a strategy for player 2. Then we let B1 of X be the best response for player 1 given player 2 chooses X. Okay, and similarly, if A is a strategy for player 1, then we let B2 of A be the best response for player 2 given that player 1 plays A. Okay, and finally B1 of blank and B2 of blank are called the best response functions. This is just the notation I use to denote the best response functions. Okay, and the way you should think about this, okay, so B1 of X, you should read this as best response for player 1 given player 2 plays X. So this is how you read this function. Best response for player 1, best response for player 1 given player 2 plays X. And similarly, B2 of A is the best response for player 2 given player 1 chooses A. So let's do an example. Maybe I'll just make up a game. Okay, so I want to do an example. Player 2 is here. Player 1 is here. Maybe player 1 has strategies A and B. Player 2 has strategies X, Y, and Z. And the payoffs are 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 1, 3, 1, 1, 2, and 2, 0. So this is just a game that I made up. Okay, it doesn't come from a story, I just made this game up. And the question would be, calculate the best response functions. That's the question. So that means that we need to calculate both of them, the best response function for player 1 and the best response function for player 2. So let's get started. Let's start with player 1. Player 1 needs to know 3 things. What's the best thing player 1 can do if player 2 chooses X? What's the best response for player 1 if player 2 chooses Y? And what's the best response for player 1 if player 2 chooses Z? So let's just go through these one by one. Let's start with the best response for player 1 if player 2 chooses X. So if player 2 chooses X, that means we restrict to this column right here. Okay? Player 2 choosing X means that if player 1 chooses A, they will win 1 point. And if player 1 chooses B, they will win 3 points. So player 1, if they play A, then they get +1. If they play B, then they get +3. Well, what's the better outcome? What's the best thing for them to do? It's not too difficult to see that the best thing for them to do would be to play B. Okay, let me just erase this to make room. So what am I saying? I'm saying that the best response for player 1 if player 2 chooses X is B. Let's move on to the next one. The best response for player 1 if player 2 chooses Y. Now we're restricting to this column. We're assuming that player 2 chooses Y, which means player 1 could win 2 points if they play A, or they could win 1 point if they play B. Well, 2 points is better than 1 point, so the best thing for them to do would be to choose A. Finally, the best response for player 1 if player 2 chooses Z. They have a choice between 4 points and 2 points. 4 points is higher, so they'll choose to play A. That's the best response. Okay, this is the best response function for player 1. Now let's work it out for player 2. So player 2 needs to know what's the best response for player 2 if player 1 chooses A, and what's the best response for player 2 if player 1 chooses B. And that's all we need to consider, right? Because player 1 only has 2 strategies. Player 1 only has A and B. So if player 1 chooses A, we restrict to this column. This row, we restrict to this row, which means that player 2 has a choice between playing X and getting 2, playing Y, getting 3, and playing Z and getting 1. Well, Y gives the highest payoff for player 2, so that's what they care about, and that's the best option, Y. Okay. The best response for player 2 if player 1 chooses B. Now we restrict to this row. If player 2 chooses X, they get 1. If player 2 chooses Y, they get 2. And if player 2 chooses Z, they get 0. Well, again, Y is the best. So I put Y there. And this here is the best response function for player 2. These are the 2 best response functions. Okay. One thing, so this is the end of the example. That's the example complete. I forgot to mention earlier, just to point something out, when you're talking about the best response functions, you don't care about the payoff for your opponent. So when I'm trying to work out what's the best response if my opponent chooses a certain strategy, all I care about is the payoff for my payoffs. I don't care about the opponent's payoffs. Okay, this is going to come up in later videos and I'll highlight it again. But for now, I think I'll finish, and that's the end of this video.